Hello, everybody. Today is a fabulous day. Sitting here looking, and we have a podcast of extraordinary. We've got Ann Bridges on today. She is an authoress, and I mean, she's got books. She's in Silicon Valley, and we're going to be talking about. She's got novels, and I don't normally talk about novels, but this is going to be kind of fun because we're actually talking about real world stuff with a novelist. And welcome, Ann, and thank you very much for stopping by the Energy Newsbeat podcast.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I always look forward to talking to new people and kind of opening their eyes and minds to things that they hadn't heard before from nonfiction or the mainstream media.
Well, what started you off being an author?
Well, I had a career in Silicon Valley here, working in the communications industry mostly, and then the internet happened and I was thrown into the computer industry, and the internet happened and VCs, and I was with a small startup that went public. But I just had all this knowledge and experience, but it got overwhelming. So I kind of stepped out, and then I realized, well, I had information, especially I wanted to reach out to women, because that was right when there was an outreach to try to bring more women. And I said, okay, well, I'll tell my story. And so that launched my first novel, Private Offerings, which actually won the Wealth Management Best Business Fiction in 2015. And that actually was talking about how you can manipulate press releases and China's influence and their desire starting in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, to really, I'll say infiltrate, but really expose and start extracting technology from Silicon Valley. So the defense industry had left. The Cold War was ostensibly over, and all of a sudden we were opening up for the first time a lot of the technology that had been very closed off to the rest of the world. So I wrote that novel, and in the meantime, we had this embargo in 2010 of China against Japan for rare earths. And I understood what that meant in terms of just-in-time supply manufacturing, how the hardware had left this region in terms of manufacturing. And I kept on waiting for the big companies to talk about it, the Apples and the HPs and the Ciscos. Silence, absolutely silence. And so I decided to write a sequel called Rare Metal about Silicon Valley's kind of sticking ostrich, head in the sand approach to some of the issues that really were creating risk. And that was basically, it's a sequel continuing the same, some of the same characters going forward. And that really resonated within the industry of minerals mining, and they couldn't believe that someone from Silicon Valley was actually talking about it. And in fact, one of my contacts had been blocked. A lot of the congressional record, a lot of the information coming out of the Pentagon had been considered classified. And so he was unable to talk about what he knew to be the case. And so he kind of served as background for me on some of the critical Pentagon scenes. Being here in California, I see where there's a lot of deal making going on. There is an attraction to bring China's money here and to create this good business relationship to China without really understanding or recognizing publicly what that meant. And that morphed me into the co-authoring Groundbreaking with Dr. Ned Mamula, who wanted to bring a lot of these facts in a very easy to understand, non-academic book. And so we collaborated on that. I don't have a degree in geology or chemistry, by the way. So.
It was very fascinating, and I really enjoyed prepping for this because when you sit back and you take a look at how Groundbreaking is laid out, you talk about not only the regulations but you also talk about what's important. People don't realize how much things that we get, the number of commodities that we get, where we get them from. All these things are critical. I mean, if you sit here and take a look at some of the stuff that is in here, China has forgive me for wrong, but I should have all my paper notes here and everything, but it's the China has so much of the rare earth minerals, and 15 of those are so critical for the whole world and everything else, but regulations have killed the US. I mean,
They have, and they're a byproduct of major mining. I mean, you have to look at the cost efficiencies of pulling together these very small commodities. It's like trying to extract a specific spice when you have a spice
right.
mixture in your cabinet. Okay, so how do you find that? Well, the way to do it is you mine tons of iron ore, which is why China dominates the steel industry. But when you mine all that, now you can cost effectively extract the tonnage needed for rare earth elements. So you'll often hear the pushback that rare earths are not very rare. They are scattered around the world. They are indeed, but they are scattered. And so to make it a good business proposition, China stepped forward and said, well, we'll do it. That'll be how we'll pull ourselves out of communism.
Yep. And in you're on page 53 on this January 2018 report. China put a long lock on much Africa's vast resources, and China has got their hand all over the place. When you take a look at in Ethiopia just now, China had gone out and built a dam. So they go out and they work with them and they say, oh, by the way, here's the long arm of China. And then all of a sudden you're into them for all this money. So this whole mineral thing is so critical because it's a way to get into these countries' pocketbooks. Is that a
Very
fair
much so.
statement?
Yeah, and this started, Deng Xiaoping, if many people think of him as the person who really kickstarted capitalism in China. But what he did really was he recognized that China had these minerals, China had rare earths, and the technologies were moving in that direction to be wholly reliant on them. Computing technology, communications, medical, space,
Right.
all need rare earths. So rather than try to compete in areas that they did not have the resources, they modeled themselves actually after OPEC with oil, which we are now seeing today how effective that is. And they basically encouraged most of the US manufacturers to move their manufacturing close to the source of these components. They graduate 100,000 university degrees in geology and metallurgy. We do 1,000. I mean, that's just the scale. So they have expertise. They are going all around the world trying to identify the natural resources that they can now, excuse me, control, price control, be a chokehold for national security, you could argue as well. So it's back to the future in terms of fighting over natural resources, whether it's water or land
Right.
or oil and gas, but now rare earths. But it's the same issue. They have really established themselves very, very well in being the global leader in this.
Well, the next piece of this, there's a couple of things: supply chain and national security. And you address in here that minerals are national security, and we don't even have a agency now that's in charge of this. Did I get that, or did I dream that?
So we used to have what's called the Bureau of Mines, and they were a single repository for all this information that was defunded. Basically, in the Clinton administration, working with China, they said, sure, if you're going to take all this on, we don't need to fund this. We have better things to do with government money.
Yep.
And so it's kind of split between the Department of Energy and the Department of Interior now. The USGS is under the Department of Interior. But we have spent more time actually mapping other countries' resources as part of our foreign outreach. For example,
Wow.
then we have our own. We really don't know exactly what we have, except geologists can look and say, well, generally, when you have, nickel, you're going to get this kind of rare earth. So when you dig for copper, you're going to get this kind of metal as a co-product. And there's nothing that's really stopping us from doing it, except I think it's fear at this point. We implemented a lot of environmental laws in the 70s and the 80s. And since we've put them into place, we really have not had problems. All the pictures you're seeing from the media, all the stories that they reference are from before we had these regulations in place.
Wow.
But it's taking 7 to 10 years to get permitting. And even if you get permitted, for example, in Nevada, there are 3 new lithium mines that have been permitted, and they are being blocked. So you have the environmentalists who want the electric cars,
Right.
to clean up the air. But that now you have people go, well, we got to worry about the groundwater. And then someone else says, well, we have to worry about the plant life. And someone else says, well, how about those sage grouse birds? And someone else comes forward and says, yes, but these are indigenous lands with sacred burial grounds. So you have these very favorite leftist causes, and they're fighting each other. And in the meantime, it's stalling all progress on being able to truly be resource independent here, the same way we were with oil and gas. We need to start establishing that beachhead for America as well.
Isn't that crazy? I'm sitting here, and when you take a look at your metals operations in the United States, boy, the West is incredible, and Alaska is really incredible. There's only the ones up in Missouri, it looks like, on your map, and just a
Yeah,
couple others.
and the Minnesota, Michigan, the old
Yes.
Rust Belt, that was iron ore, and it still has nickel. It still has cobalt. Those are, again, some mines that have been stalled out. Tesla, in fact, cut a deal with a mine, I think it's called Talon Mine, up
Right.
in Michigan. But in order to even let some of that permitting go through, he had to agree to let the UAW, I believe, one of the unions, major unions, try to organize there. So now they're looking at outputting it to Canada instead. I mean, it's crazy. We're just letting all these politics get in the way.
And then when you talk about supply chain issues, we are now in the fourth commodities boom we've ever been in, and it is going to be just exacerbated to absolute misery for everybody because of the energy crisis. Now we have, and so we have this whole worldwide mess of printing money to get to renewables. That is, when you print money, it causes inflation. Then you're going to have this. Now we have rising, I mean, the geopolitical stuff with oil and gas is raising this. And then the supply chains that you alluded to have gone horribly wrong. How does rare earth minerals fit into the supply chain?
Well, in a number of ways. First of all, again, if the idea behind trying to be more environmentally friendly with these mobile, smaller, high-tech gear, and we'll just focus on that for a second. And they're over in China. Well, it takes incredible heat, generally coal heated furnaces, to get the heat up to like the 3,000, 5,000 degrees needed to melt these metals and shape them. Okay, so then they're all shaped there, and then they're shipped back here. Well, we've got that transport cost, and you've got the weight, and now you're starting to see truckers complain about the fact they literally cannot afford the fuel. So we're going to end up sitting in a situation where you have half of the components over in one area of the world waiting for supply in the other. And that's what we saw, in fact, with the car manufacturers. They were all short chips, right? So you can finish the entire car, but until you have chips, you're not going to go forward. Same thing with the Defense Department and National Security. Our submarines, for example, require magnets, very powerful magnets, in order to stay submerged. Well, they need specific rare earths as well. I think neodymium is one of them. And we have it here in Wyoming, but we've been doing it over in China. Well, why wouldn't we want to make it close, make it under our own power to do it, rather than just importing it through China? But one of the reasons that happened is the defense contractors wanted to sell to China. And China said, well, if you want to manufacture here, if you want to sell to us, if you want to sell your, fighter jets, and we're going to buy them, then you have to manufacture them here. If you're going to manufacture them here, then we will sell you the rare earths. And by the way, we're going to model the exact same plant and duplicate it. So Boeing, for example, Lockheed Martin would have to give their manufacturing plant designs blueprints in advance to China, and they'd get there and they'd find out that an identical one has just been built in the parcel next door to it. And I mean, it's literally, you could argue that's IP theft. You could argue that it's simply them, planning on doing it themselves eventually. It's crazy. And this is all known, but no one wants to talk about it because it's so stupid and no one knows exactly how to extricate themselves out, from it. So this is why it's fiction, because I can make comments like that.
Okay, I don't think this is fiction though, and this is
Well,
kind of
truth,
frightening.
truth
Um,
becomes stranger. Yeah.
oh, this is crazy, and it's just gonna keep getting worse. We're going down that rabbit hole of bad
Mhm.
energy policy, and then the hypocrisy is just driving me nuts. Of people that let's leave going greener off the table, because we
Yeah.
do need to get rid of carbon. I don't want to get into that argument. We need CO2 to grow plants, but there is climate. Let's just leave all that out of it. But how we get there is really important. We just can't print money. We can't do all these things. But when we sit back and take a look at logical writing like yours, wow. Why can't we all have a nice conversation with other folks? And being in California, we were kind of joking before you came on. You're not very popular at parties when you start bringing up these facts, are you?
No, no. People want to believe that batteries are everything, and especially in Silicon Valley, so many of the decision makers are they're affluent, let's put it that way. And so when you say, Secretary Buttigieg the other day said, "Well, just buy a Tesla or buy an electric car," they not only buy Teslas, but they have no problem with springing the money for the extra battery pack. And
Right.
Governor Newsom is now going to use GM trucks as grid backup for this summer, where I'm sure we're going to have a power problem. So in California, we have a basic electrical grid reliability issue in the summertime. And we're
Right.
talking about converting all these homes to electric, all the cars to electric. We don't have a grid. We don't have copper. We have copper in Alaska. We're just not mining it. And China has been stockpiling all these resources. In fact, I saw they had like 85% of the mined copper resources on hand right now. So they've stockpiled it. So they're either going to do their own
Wow.
grid, or they're going to be selling it to all of us at a premium price sometime soon. So
I'll tell you, you and I are in the wrong business. I mean, we should have been stockpiling this stuff years ago. But what is a gateway? We all know what a gateway drug is, but what's a gateway metal? When we sit back and kind of think, okay, great, they've got the stockpile, but what is a gateway metal? And how can the next question after this is, what are our next steps? How do we get to energy, or excuse me, rare earth mineral? Because this is all related. We
mineral
can't
dependence.
have anything else.
I'm gonna refer to the book. Like I said, I'm not a geologist or a chemist, but it's an interesting one. So copper is an example. All the rare earths, and there are 17 of them, depending on how you define them. And rare earths have unique qualities. That's why they're, in addition to the fact that they're rare, they have these unique qualities. They're what make your phone small and can handle these extreme
Right.
heats when your tiny little chips are the one make that bright red on your phone. So they are all used for these very specific functions. So if we mined copper, we would get rare earths. And you could cost justify the mining of that rare earths if you allowed us to mine copper, right? But if you
Right.
don't let us mine copper, then we won't get to the rare earths. Nickel is another one where we get cobalt. So cobalt, a lot of people are aware of because we're getting
Oh,
it right now from the Democratic Congo, where they literally use 4-year-old girls to climb down into these tiny little holes to pull out cobalt, right? And we've known about this. In fact, the environmental officer for Apple, who used to be the EPA administrator, wrote a report of this. Okay, so it's not like this is being done under the scenes. These are major people, major influencers who just are not saying, yes, we need to mine cobalt, and we can mine cobalt here in this country. But the other portion of it, besides just the gateway output, is the processing up to now, and the way China does it is really environmentally messy.
oh,
It doesn't
yeah.
have to be right. It doesn't have to be as toxic as the pictures we're seeing. There are a lot of new technologies that are coming forward that are doing it very cleanly. The question now is, from the pilot program to the scalability, can we do it? So they're trying that. The other solution they're putting forward is, let's recycle. Well, you can't recycle until you have a quantity to recycle from. And the other thing is, when you're dealing with these kinds of metals and minerals, they change in the process of shaping them, extreme heat, et cetera. So unlike aluminum can or glass, where you toss it in a barrel and be done with it, in rare earths, you could try to pull that out of your phone in a recycled batch, and the
Right.
metal is totally different. So it is not retrievable the way it, the way you think it would be. So how do we go from here? That was your next question. I think the issue is a priority issue. I think when we as a country say we want to maintain our lead in technology, we want to have the kind of lifestyle that our 21st century citizenry expects, needs, however you want to describe it, then we have a similar obligation to invest back into our own resources, our land, and to be able to, and you do it very well. There's no reason that we can't match Canada and Australia's environmental standards for mining. They've been doing this forever. We just have to say, yes, we can, and we will do it, and not worry so much about the fact that 100 years ago we polluted, right? That's not where we are today.
Oh yeah. And it's like the Texas oil and gas, they were flaring for so long, and they didn't wait for they in the last 10 years, 5, maybe 7 years, they've really cleaned up their own act. And
Quite
it's
a bit.
because they're now starting to sell the product and it's making more sense. Back in Pennsylvania, they've been taking care of all that for a long time because that was the way it was. Now, over regulating can kill price. And you explain a lot of that in the book about regulations killed the beast. I mean, and I loved your minerals are now the new oil, chapter 1. You gotta like that. So how did you meet Ned, your co-author on the book?
So I'm a networker, and I ended up not knowing anything about this. I was really looking for people in the industry to vet my book, to read it and make sure I hit all the high notes, right? You look for alpha readers and beta readers. And the people there were wonderful. They opened up their Rolodexes and said, you need to talk to this person. And that person said, I would talk to this person. So I was simply introduced to Ned. He was at Cato Institute at the time. And we stayed in touch, and he wrote to me once and said, please, let's collaborate on this. I'd like to do a book, but I want your style. So it worked. Yeah. Well, he's an academic. No, he's not an academic, but he knows that he was not able to bring it down to that very clear language. And if you see in the book what I did, if all you do is flip through and read the boxes that I wrote, which are, hey, animal, vegetable, mineral. These are really basic things that we learned about with kids, but let's think about what that means. If you're not growing it, it's being manufactured somewhere. And I was picking up, items off of my shelf today because potash, I don't know if you're aware, Russia is now saying they're going to stop the exports of potash, which is a fertilizer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and we need it. There's been tremendous droughts and floods throughout the world. California is having a horrible drought. So we need potash and fertilizer in order to get the food yields up. And what you've got is when you take your vitamins and minerals, when you have zinc for your cold, these are minerals, these are in the land. You have to extract them somehow. You can't just pretend that you don't need them. And I think we've raised a group of ignorant, and I don't say that pejoratively. I think a lot of the young people are ignorant of the role that minerals and the earth plays in our life. They've been worried about climate change, I guess.
You just alluded to something that is just so horrible. We're in an energy crisis. We're in the crisis of supply chain issues. Food is going to be the next big one this next year. Mm-hmm. You got to have natural gas, and you got to have all those other ones to make fertilizer. Russia is the breadbasket of Europe. They export so much stuff out. You're going to see some crisis in the food area there. Mm-hmm. It's all related. I mean, this is frightening.
It is, because only China really, I think, has recognized how to really leverage those resources. So you talked about how they're expanding through their Belt and Road program. It's a concept of reestablishing the old Silk Road. And so they've reached out to a lot of these emerging countries and said, well, we'll finance XYZ so that we can tap into your resources. And Congo is one of them. So Congo's cobalt output goes directly to a Chinese distributor. It used to, to, I assume it's still the case, who then ships it to China. Well, they would say, well, it's not really Chinese cobalt. No, but they are controlling it. And if the DRC, for example, defaults on their debt payment, which is what happened to Sri Lanka, they defaulted and all of a sudden China ended up owning a very critical port. One of the disputes in the Himalayas between India and China is water. China wants to tap into the snowmelt from the Himalayas in order to have hydropower, but also to make sure they have water for their citizenry. And India is very aware of that and is fighting back on that. So it's very big. And let me also say, since we're at war, antimony is used for bullets, anything, and explosives, anything that goes bang is how it was described to me. So we have an antimony mine that is languishing in Idaho. It saved our butt in World War II. And we can't get permitting, and yet we're just sending ammunition to Ukraine and Poland or whomever we're sending it to these days to fight a war, but without thinking about the fact that in order for us to replenish those bullets, we're going to need to rely on, at best, an ally, and at worst, someone we're at war with. That makes no sense.
I had not even thought of that. Things that make, when you said that, I thought you were thinking, you were speaking about alimony and not alimony.
Antimony.
Antimony. Okay, great. I was thinking, holy, where does this, I don't want to pay. So that's a Texas way to think of alimony. It ain't antimony. Anyway, sorry. But no, I mean, that's a horrible thought that we're going to be held hostage to bullets.
Well, held hostage or need to ask permission. And this is true with, we started manufacturing Jeeps over in China, night vision goggles. We saw this with COVID and the protective gear and the tests. All of a sudden, whether you want to believe it was purposeful or not, it's clearly the virus started in China somehow. And we needed their cooperation to do it. Well, pretend for a second it wasn't accidental. Pretend they said, nope, we released this, and no, you're not going to get any of this stuff manufactured. You saw what we had to do to get our own manufacturing line turned around very quickly. It was a major effort. Now try to do that when mining logistically takes years to dig, right? You can't just, have the fabric there. It's so.
That's like in the oil and gas. They're saying, go ahead and turn on the spigot and let's pump more oil. It doesn't work that way. We're years away from spinning everything back up. Biden asking Venezuela for oil. They're decimated. They don't have any money at all in their oil and gas, and mining is even worse.
Well, I think one of the problems that happened is there was this belief that Silicon Valley was tech, and the Silicon Valley leaders would, of course, figure this all out. And what most people failed to realize is that Silicon Valley has turned into software and apps. Once the internet happened in the 90s, we did not manufacture. And so the people who are running the companies today, even in Apple, which has some manufacturing, it's done elsewhere. So they may design it and they may have an understanding of how this stuff works. But when you get into supply chain, I was talking to a executive who worked at a lot of these chip companies, and he said, you don't get it that, when the purchasing agents want to buy something, they go to these software companies that have databases and they say, okay, where can I get cobalt and what's the price? And I need it in 6 months in this kind of quantities. So they may be able to get that, but the components, right? So if I need a very specific component for a chip layer, for example, they go, we have no idea what's in it. It's made in China. You order from China in its finished form. And they're already tracking something like 800,000 parts every day around the world. And to now bring in the concept of, ESG, where we know exactly what's in every single component and where it comes from, it's not. And I'll give you a funny example. So I was laughing because my Thanksgiving turkey had a barcode on it. And I said, oh, see, look, we're even tracking food. And he laughed. He said, no, because that's easy. It's a whole turkey. Now pretend you're trying to figure out where that turkey's gizzard went into what cat food, that's going to be eaten in India. Now track that. And I went, oh, and do that for the entire turkey and all the different turkeys from all the different farms in the country. and you get a sense, of what you were talking about. It seems so simplistic, but it's very, very complicated, and no one's really been willing to take it on until there's been a demand from the corporations to want to take it on, and they don't want to do it until the government requires them to.
Speaking of funny, did you hear that story not too long ago that they were going to ship chickens, live chickens, to China, have them processed in China, and then ship them back?
Yeah.
Did you hear that one?
I did. And this is, again, this concept, they have no idea the logistics and the cost of the fuel, back and forth. I suspect that was to get chickens to China because they were having another avian flu outbreak. And then, well, they'll be there for another year or so, and they'll breed them, and, chickens, hatch pretty fast. So
that was pretty weird to me. People have lost their minds with Santa. I mean, this is insane. I can't wait to go to a cocktail party with you and just really kind of eavesdrop on some of these parties with you. I'm looking forward to that. But with the next steps, what can we do to get our Congress people on the phone to do we're at a point where we got to make some changes. What would you think our next steps, if you're just listening to this, what can we do you think?
If you really want to get into national policy, I think, yes, we need to elect the people who want to tap America's resources.
That was a heavy sigh you just
did. Well, we've been working this for a long time. The environmentalists are funded through a lot of these foundations, right? Yep. So the Ford Foundation, et cetera, and they have dominated discussion. I've suggested to mining companies that they go out and take their own pictures and try to get them into Getty Images, because that's what media use. Right. But the media they have their agenda, right? So op-eds, meet with your local people, meet with your school kids. I was talking to a dad. He said he just went in with a big, garbage can to his kids and said, okay, did you grow your smartphone? No, it goes in here. And basically, except for stripping down to their underwear, everything that they touched, that they used, went into that bag. And even when you talk about fossil fuels, they don't even understand the things that you need. Rubber tires for your electric car, you need fossil fuels, you need Vaseline for your baby's diapers. So a lot of them just need to understand the very basic everyday things that they touch do require minerals. And the phrase I've been using is minerals advance civilizations. If you remember the Flintstones
say that again.
Minerals advance civilization. Otherwise, we're going back to the Stone Age, right? Literally, right? That's where we went. We have stone, iron, bronze, etc. The information age, as much as it was tagged that way, was way too virtual, and we lost the sense of the reality of life. And so if we want to keep our Western civilization, if we want to advance, if we want to have technology, we are going to require minerals, and we need to prioritize them in a fashion that we can do and we must do. You can do it at the state level. Nevada is more supportive of mining. West Virginia clearly is starting to now, coal mining, Pennsylvania. So it's both national, local, but we need to start talking about it as in terms of how realistic it is that to push this green agenda through without having the fundamental minerals mined here and efficiently transported. Even, local quarries, they do all this cement. You want to have roads, you need to have cement.
And cement uses a lot of coal. It uses coking coal in order to get that heat up, doesn't it?
Yep. Yeah, it's exactly right. It's the heat. And solar and wind are never going to do that kind of manufacturing. So
no. In fact, we were doing a study on California, and they're down to one coal plant. They're down to one nuclear plant.
Yep.
And they're still using as much coal as they were in the past because and putting out the same amount of CO2 because of the cement and all the other manufacturing is still having to use coal.
Yep.
I'm like, wait a minute. Those numbers are buried at the EIA, and we're looking, going, wait a minute, why isn't anybody talking about this?
They're buried. Well, and I blame media on some of this. They take the talking points from these press releases. Governor Newsom had one on the lithium that was announced a couple of weeks ago, and they mushed together. There's a Department of Defense, $35 million went towards a mine for rare earths in Southern California. In
Right.
addition, a small amount of money was going to see whether or not we could extract lithium. And the media reported, oh, $35 million is going to go to build lithium ion batteries in California so we could have it in a couple of years. And so, it's an education. That's all it is. Yeah.
All right. What's next for Ann? You got 15 more books or coming around the corner. Tell us what's going around the corner for Ann.
Ann is still plugging away, trying to change policy with Ned. We've been doing a lot of op-eds. We see that there is an opportunity sadly, with what's going on now with the war and the price of oil, et cetera. There's much more of a recognition that maybe this green energy transition is not going to be seamless and is not going to be harmless. So how do we plan for that? I think there hasn't been a plan, and so I'm encouraging Ned actually to try to come up with maybe a template for a policy statement that we can do, that we can say, here, this might work, and get the Congress behind that. But it's going to take electing people who want to do that and having a realistic sense of the priorities that our country needs to have.
In your book, I think it's called Breaking Ground, I think something like that. You also talked about having the Clean Water Act, because the Clean Air Act came out not too long ago. And then the Clean Water Act was was it 78? If I can't, but you did great bringing that one in. And then the Clean Air Act brought in a whole bunch of new stuff. And that wasn't that many years ago. So
no, it wasn't.
And
right. The Supreme Court actually has a a case in front of it that they need to decide by June that may start regulating what the EPA's power really is, or bounding that a little bit. We're seeing that with some of what they did with Commerce and HHS with the COVID, that these regulatory bodies have decided that they are all powerful in determining what's going on. And they really have been limited by legislation. In fact, there's a very small piece of legislation that was passed, I want to say in 1980, it's called FLTMA, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but basically it required that there be balance between regulatory oversight and the ability to develop the mining resources, the mineral resources. It required it. This is legislation. So any regulation that's saying, well, no, we want to give the sage-grouse bird habitat priority. No, that is not in the law. You want to have that in the law, you have to pass a new law.
That's brilliant. And so that is going to be some stuff. I would like to invite you to please send us anything that you would like for us to put in the story. We're going to transcribe this. We're going to take out anything that makes me sound smart, because I steal all your material. And anyway, we do thank you very much for stopping by the podcast today, and we're going to have all your contact information there as well too. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. I would just end with, you don't have to be brilliant or a geologist to understand, that the things that you rely on every single day do require these minerals to be extracted. So let's do it right. Let's do it here.
Oh, this was a refreshing conversation, and I'm going to fly out when I win my bet. If we get 25,000 downloads on this, we'll go have lunch. But okay. I want to go to a cocktail party with you and really hear some of your discussions at those cocktail parties. So thank you.
Okay, you may have to wait a year. We just literally opened up last week for COVID.
Okay.
Silicon Valley was the last one.
That's funny. All right. Well, thank you very much.